Thank you, Gaurav. You're far too generous and kind. It's a privilege to be here today. I want to tell you a sea story about a recent expedition that we did to the far north. And I'm here representing a large team. My co-PIs on this project in the development of this underwater vehicle and the campaigning with it are Mike Jakuba, Christopher German, and Andy Bowen, all of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I hold an adjunct appointment. But it's a large team effort, and I want to make sure that I make clear that, that while I'm a co-PI, none of this would happen without the team. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is the largest private institution for ocean research in the world. It has about 1,000 employees, and it has 6 departments where they conduct academic research. One is marine policy, one is engineering, the second from the bottom, that's my department, and the rest are natural sciences. And Woods Hole is perhaps the leading developer and operator of deep submergence technology for ocean science. Many of you learned about the human-occupied submarine Alvin that was developed back in the 60s. I remember learning about it in grade school. And Alvin is still with us. There isn't a single part on Alvin that dates back to 1965. It's been rebuilt too many times. It was recently went through an overhaul to extend its depth range from 4,500 meters to 6,500 meters. I've done 4 dives in Alvin, and let me tell you, it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on, I swear. And so over the last more than 2 decades, I've collaborated with various folks at Woods Hole, and including on various projects, including developing the navigation system on Alvin, and developing the navigation and control system for the Jason 1 ROV. I was a co-PI and co-developer of the Jason 2 ROV, the currently operational 6,500 meter vehicle. Navigation control system for the Sentry vehicle. The primary development of that vehicle was Danny Yorger and Al Bradley at Woods Hole. And I'm a co-PI on the Nereid project. This is a project designed to where we developed a vehicle that's capable of diving to 11,000 meters, which is as deep as the ocean gets. Most oceanographic vehicles, there's probably about 10 vehicles worldwide that can dive down to 6,500 meters. And scientists have been denied routine access to the subduction zones, which go down to as deep as 11,000 meters in the Marianas Trench. So the Nereid underwater vehicle was designed to operate as an autonomous vehicle with no tether for doing survey operations. We could reconfigure it with a work package and a robot arm and additional cameras and a expendable fiber optic tether that went to the surface so that we could remotely control it for intervention operations and sampling. We pitched this in the original Nereid program 15 years ago, but we got serious about developing a vehicle for polar work about 8 years ago. And the motivation for this is that scientists have almost no access to the water column and the seafloor under fixed and moving polar ice. And you're probably all aware that 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by oceans, so we shouldn't really be calling it Earth. We should be calling it ocean. And but you may not be aware that 12% of the seafloor, 12% of the world's oceans are covered by sea ice during all or part of the year. And this is a huge obstacle to accessing both the upper, middle, and lower water column and the seafloor. So sea ice covers about 25 million square kilometers. Now, one of the geographic features of interest that is of great interest to science and that has been largely denied to science are features like, for example, the Gackle Ridge. All right, so what is the Gackle Ridge? It's a subterranean mountain. It's a submerged mountain range that's about 2,000 kilometers in length. The base of the Gackle Ridge and the axial valley, where the magma is being generated, vary between about 3,000 meters and 5,500 meters depth. It's covered by polar ice cap most of the year. Some of it covered by polar ice cap all of the year. Polar ice, sorry, moving sea ice. And 15 years ago, Hetty Edmonds headed up a cruise in which she sampled water from deep in the water column all along the length of this ridge and did GC analysis on it and determined that there is active hydrothermal venting. So there are active volcanoes all along this ridge. Nobody's ever actually found one, sampled it, and named it. And so that's a scientific objective that was a strong motivation for us to develop a vehicle that could operate under moving sea ice. Here's the limitation with using conventional tethered vehicles. A conventional tethered remotely operated vehicle works like this. you've got a giant steel armored cable. The ones that we use are 17 millimeters in diameter, and they carry both power and data over fiber optics. And this cable is heavy, and it weighs about 800 kilograms per kilometer in the water. And so it's a big, heavy cable. It hangs very vertically. And at the bottom of the cable, you put a depressor weight. And then you use a neutrally buoyant tether to connect this depressor weight to your vehicle. And so this vehicle is neutrally buoyant. It's got gigabit communications to the surface, but you can only operate in a short leash around this depressor weight. So that's a big limitation. So that's what's indicated by this sort of footprint circle here. And the problem, in blue water operations, no problem. You use dynamic positioning to servo the ship to hover around anywhere you want. And if you want to go a little to the left or a little to the right, you just tell the ship's officers, and they'll drive the ship over to hover your weight exactly over a site of interest. Now, when you're operating the polar ice pack, unless the ice is really, really thin, when you have cable over the side, you can't break ice. So that means you're going to be carried along with the moving ice. So sea ice up in the Arctic is moving. It rarely moves slower than a quarter nautical mile per hour. If the wind's really howling in a storm, it easily gets up above a nautical mile per hour. And so you can't control the ground track of your ROV. And so you might go flying by a site of interest, but you won't be able to stay there very long. And and if there is something that you want to go look at, you just may not be able to get there because you can't control the ship's XY track. So the concept that we pursued leverages on the lightweight expendable tether that we developed for the 11,000 meter vehicle. It sounds really unlikely, but it really works. And it works like this. This thing right here is a depressor that's attached with a steel cable to the ship. Inside that depressor, we put a 20-kilometer spool of really, really thin fiber optic cable, 250 microns in diameter, single mode fiber optic cable. And you can spool 20 kilometers of that stuff into a canister that's about this big. And then attached to the vehicle, we have a tow body. And the tow body can be positively or negatively buoyant depending on whether you're working under the ice or on the seafloor. And inside that tow body, which is about a meter long, we put another 20 kilometers of fiber, again in a canister about this big. And so you lower these two over the side with the tow body and the depressor mated. And when you finish vehicle checkouts over the side, you release the tow body from the depressor. The ship can get carried over the horizon with the ice, and the vehicle can move freely both vertically and horizontally. So it completely decouples the motion of the ship and the vehicle up to the limit of your fiber optic tether. And in practice, we haven't been limited by the fiber optic tether. We're just limited by the amount of energy the vehicle can carry. So this is a little depiction of the vehicle in launch configuration. You put the vehicle over the side, you put the depressor in the water, you drive the vehicle down, pace it with the depressor, and when you got the depressor at a depth that you like, then you release the tow body and the vehicle continues on its way. Fiber's paying from both ends. The pay point tension is between 100 and 180 grams. So this gives you tremendous horizontal and vertical mobility. And if you want to go over to a particular side of the seafloor and hang out there for 3 hours while the ship gets carried off over the horizon, that's just fine. I don't have time to talk about some of the systems that we use, such as how do we do navigation and things like that. Go to Laughlin's poster tomorrow, or Zach's poster this afternoon. They'll tell you all about it. This is a artist's depiction of how we envisioned the vehicle would operate if you're doing near surface work under moving sea ice. In this case, it depicts the vehicle sampling a microbial mat under multi-year ice. So the vehicle, we called it Nereid under ice. Nereid was the daughter of Nereus, the previous vehicle that we developed. And our German collaborators shortened that to the acronym NUI. So I'll refer to this vehicle as NUI from here on out. It is roughly the size and weight of a Volkswagen Beetle. It's electrically powered. It carries lithium-ion batteries and pressure-tolerant lithium-ion batteries, 18 kilowatt hours. It can be equipped with cameras and an electrohydraulic arm and sampling instruments, or we can strip those off and configure the vehicle for autonomous operations for surveys. It's got a great variety of telemetry, RF on the surface. We've got 2 frequencies of modems, 3.5 and 10 kilohertz. And of course, when you get the fiber optic tether going, then you've got multiple gigabit channels. It can be equipped with a great variety of imaging and sonar systems, upward and downward looking ADCPs. This is the front end of the vehicle in AUV mode, and the camera is about to come off, and these are physical oceanographic sensors. It's two pumped CTDs with echo pucks, fluorimeters, and other biological sensors. This is the sort of quarter view of the vehicle. You can see the three battery packs of pressure-tolerant lithium-ion batteries, upward-looking and downward-looking acoustic Doppler current profiler. We use an X-Blue FINS inertial navigation system, and emergency beacons here. And we actually have an avalanche beacon in one of these containers up here. So if we get a dead vehicle stuck under the ice, we can just use an avalanche beacon detector to find it. And we did this last cruise and it worked. Our first deployment was in 2014. We mobilized in Tromsø, headed just to the west of Svalbard. Iceland is down here someplace, to give you a sense. Iceland is pretty far south. And we were operating 200 kilometers northeast of Greenland. Right on the southern end of the Gackel Ridge in an area called the Aurora Vent Field. During that cruise, we only operated in the top 50 meters of the water column, and we were doing mostly plankton biology and ice physics, and several journal papers have resulted on that. And we've reported on the navigation techniques and things like that we developed in previous ICRAs and IEEE Oceans. I like this photo. I took this with my cell phone. This is towards the end of the cruise. We're about to do a vehicle launch. The depressor and the tow body were a slightly different configuration back in 2014, but this is a beautiful day where we had lovely weather, and we were doing simultaneous NUI ops and helicopter operations with the ship. In fall of 2016, we got to dive the vehicle to the seafloor for the first time in the Arctic. And it was on a pretty long cruise. We mobilized in Tromsø, Norway, which is just on the Arctic Circle. We transited 7 days, 5 of it in the ice, to this site at 87 degrees north, 61 east. That's just north of Novaya Zemlya, north of Russia. And it is out there. So, 2 days through the ocean and then 5 days breaking ice to get to the site of operation. We stayed on site for 27 days, and then it was a 10-day transit, breaking out through the ice and transiting down to Bremerhaven, Germany. So it was 45 days at sea. The sun was up for a little bit at noon for the first 10 days, and then it went down and stayed down for good. It was a good cruise, but a long one. And this little inset here, this is where the Karasik Seamount is, just off to the side of the Gackel Ridge. You can see the Gackel Ridge here. And this inset shows shipboard multi-beam bathymetry of the top of the Karasik Seamount. And it's about 8 or so nautical miles long and 1 or 2 nautical miles wide. It varies, the top of the Karasik Seamount. It comes up to within 600 meters of the surface. So our home, this is my office, the Polarstern. The Polarstern is an 18,000-ton world-class icebreaker operated by the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. It carries a total complement of 100 people and about 50 officers and crew to operate the ship and all of its equipment and helicopters and stuff, and there's a science party of about 50. The chief scientist on this cruise was Dr. Antje Boidis. I'll show a picture of her later. She's a rock star marine biologist and an amazing chief scientist, and we're very grateful for her for providing the opportunity to participate in these cruises. So this is, let's see, on this last cruise, we had 6 engineers on our team, and all of whom were shown here. Casey Machado, she's the lead mechanical engineer and pilot, and Chris German was the PI on the NASA grant that funded these operations. Not shown are 2 additional scientists, one from NASA and one from a university. This is Nereid in its ROV configuration. You can see the robot arm is stowed here, lots of lights, lots of instruments for sampling biology. This is recovering the vehicle on deck, the last deployment of the cruise. We want to get this, it was quite cold. We wanted to get the vehicle on deck and get the samples out of the sample trays before they all froze. So a medley of photographs. This is the vehicle in its AUV configuration in 2016, and you can see we've got some streamlined nose stuff in order to reduce the CD of the vehicle for survey operations. This is the vehicle in its ugly ROV configuration with sampling of instruments here. The streamlined nose is off, and this is a electrohydraulic arm, 6-degree freedom electrohydraulic arm. This is launching the vehicle in its ROV configuration. You can see the robot arm here and the umbilical to the tow body there. And this is recovering the vehicle. on an AUV recovery, and you can see the sea ice here. We actually had quite a large opening on that day. Sometimes it's quite small. And you can see the multi-year ice stretching off into the horizon. So I'd like to highlight some data from three deployments on the top of the Karasik. So here's the Karasik Seamount with, from shipboard multi-beam bathymetry. You can see that it's not very high resolution. The tracks here are blue is dive 14, red is dive 15. Both of those were, the vehicle was diving as an AUV, untethered. We've only acoustic communication to the vehicle, pre-programmed mission, which we can interrupt if we want to with acoustic commands. And then dive 16, we reconfigured the vehicle as an ROV, and the scientists wanted to do sampling down here in the southwest part of the Karasik Seamount. And so we spent several hours on the bottom here while the ship was being carried off several kilometers downrange, and that's okay because the fiber's paying out in the water column. And we weren't that far away in this case, so we didn't have to break ice to get back to the vehicle. In this case, we were able to chase the ship and catch up with it at the end of this dive. And so on dive 14, we programmed the vehicle to go down to the bottom and terrain follow 50 meters off the seafloor and survey a 500 by 500 meter box on the seafloor with this downward-looking multi-beam sonar to generate a high-resolution bathymetric map. We were also sniffing the water column with our physical oceanographic sensors, hoping to sense active hydrothermal vent fluid, because then we could be heroes and find a hydrothermal vent. In the next dive, we did a multi-beam survey here, 500 by 500, transited up here to do another 500 by 500, and then did two smaller boxes where the vehicle dropped down to 3 meters above the seafloor, terrain followed, taking images with a downward-looking stereo image pair. We did 200 by 100 meter boxes. So this shows the results of one of those. This is the low-resolution ship-based multi-beam bathymetry of the top of the Karasik, and this is the map that we made on dive 15 of that lower left box, and you can see the high-resolution imagery here. There's a sort of a trough going on here that our geologists were heartbroken when we dove into that trough and we didn't sense active hydrothermal vent fluid with our sensors. They were kind of heartbroken. And this is another perspective view of the same multi-beam map with sub-meter resolution. This shows the vehicle track line for one of the boxes on dive 15, the second box. And so it's 500 by 500. The color coded here is temperature. You can see the temperature varies between 0 and 1 degree C. EH anomaly, this is redox potential, and redox potential is a measure of chemical reactivity, and it's indicative of a drop in EH is indicative of new, fresh hydrothermal vent fluid. And we had some hits here, but not strong enough to ring the bell. And bottom depth and turbidity. And so this gives you a sense of the kinds of data one can obtain. These are two stereo image pairs that the vehicle shot on dive 15. And I should mention that we got funded for this cruise at the last minute. It was a real stretch for us to get the vehicle ready in time to ship it to Norway. And we didn't have enough money, and we really didn't have enough time. And we needed a stereo camera, and we didn't have enough money or time to build one. And so we called Stefan Williams and Oscar Pizarro at University of Sydney and said, "Help!" And they loaned us one of their deep stereo cameras, and it worked beautifully. This is a scene inside the control room, which is set up in the GeoLab in the aft portion of Polarstern. Casey is driving the vehicle, and she'll be driving the robot arm in a little bit in the video that I'll show you. And this is just some various still photographs of the end of the robot arm sampling, taking a push core of a sponge. That's a shrimp. This is a deep sea octocoral that don't exist are not found in shallower waters. And this is an example of dive where we were sampling, and some of the things that we sampled: yellow sponge, under the direction of our scientists, giant sponge, glass sponges, microbial mats, cushion star, and of course the octocoral. This is a giant sponge being placed into the sample basket, which may look suspiciously like a milk crate, because it is. Other views of the corals, sponges, and the sample basket of the vehicle after it came on board. That was dive 16, I think. And this is Kai, who's he studies creatures that are smaller than a millimeter. If it's bigger than a millimeter, he's not interested. And Kai's pretty happy because he's got a sample that he selected. He told us where he wanted to sample, and so we got some samples for him with the push cores. So I'd like to show a video. And this is kind of a medley of shots from different dives. So this is, I'm not sure which dive this is. I'd have to think about it. But it's in one of the AUV dives, so there's no tether here. The vehicle is in its streamlined configuration. You lower it into the water. It's neutrally buoyant. Pull the pin. Well, it's slightly positively buoyant, but only about a kilogram or so. Vehicle's under RF control, so we'll drive away from the ship, do a vehicle checkout, and then launch the mission, and it drives down to the seafloor. So off to the races. You always have kind of a funny feeling at this point during the dive. Like, is this the last time I'm ever going to see the vehicle? And I'm happy to say that on this expedition we had the same number of recoveries as we had deployments, and so the vehicle is still with us. So this is plankton in the upper water column looking out the HD camera in the front of the vehicle. And so this is late in the season, so there's not that much plankton. The sun has gone away. When we were up there earlier in July, 2 years before, where there was massive amounts of plankton in July during the plankton bloom, and the sun is up 24 hours a day. This is a haddock, and the biologists were very surprised to see Ms. Haddock, or Mr. Haddock, I'm not sure, this far north. And there were some other surprises. So we weren't heroes in that we didn't find hydrothermal vents that our geologists desperately wanted us to locate. But we did find some things that weren't supposed to be there. Namely, here we're just getting the top of the Karasik Seamount is just coming into view, and what you can see is that it has got abundant life on it, and much more abundant than the biologists believe should exist based upon the primary production of plankton in the upper water column. So everything, except for stuff that's living around hydrothermal vents, everything that's in the water column, on the ice, like polar bears, birds, and fish, charismatic macrofauna, everything all lives off of the primary production, which is phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton and zooplankton croaks, and there's a steady stream of biomass that comes down to the seafloor. And so this was supposed to be kind of a desert, and it wasn't. And so right now our biologists don't have a good answer for where the energy is coming from, but they've got a good question. And I'm confident that if we can develop and deploy instruments like NUI and provide access to the deep ocean that in areas where it's been denied previously, that our scientific collaborators will be able to unravel this. This is a glass sponge. We're zoomed in with the HD camera. This is a shrimp who wants sunglasses because it's like, I haven't seen lights in my entire life. Now you're blasting 1,000 watts of lights at me. This is a cushion star right here. This is a glass sponge, not a very healthy one. And you can see the shrimp are going to town, eating the glass sponge. There's a close-up of the shrimp. It's about 2.5 centimeters long. And this is sampling sponge with a push core. The lab technician who curated these samples, she said, I've been doing oceanography for over 30 years, and that was the stinkiest thing I have ever smelled. If you take any more of those samples, the graduate students are going to curate them. And I can't do justice to the German accent, so I didn't try to do that, but it was great. So we sampled a bunch of stuff, got loads of samples for biologists and geologists. This is a push core going back into its quiver. This is, I think all this footage is from dive 17. The fiber stayed intact all the way back to the surface, which is kind of wild, which makes for a very easy recovery because you can just drive the vehicle to the open water. It's much more complicated if you're doing it over an acoustic channel where you need to navigate the vehicle into sometimes a very small area of open water. And we were anxious to get the vehicle back on board because a low pressure system was passing directly over us, and we knew that within about an hour we were going to be in whiteout conditions, and so we wanted to get the vehicle safely on board and get the samples off of it. So with that, I'd like to close, and I'd like to acknowledge National Science Foundation Office of Polar Program, who was willing to roll the dice on us with an MRI grant, as well as the James Family Foundation and the Jewett Foundation and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who helped fund this. The 2016 field trials were funded by the NASA Astrobiology Program. 2014 was NOAA Ocean Explorer. This is Dr. Antier Bouidis, the chief scientist on both of these expeditions, and rock star marine biologist. He's a fantastic chief scientist, as well as a well-known scientist. And she's recently appointed as director of the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the magnificent officers and crew and our other scientists on the 2014 Polarstern and 2016 Polarstern expedition. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention. Oh, and I should have warned you that I'm ashamed to admit that there are no deep learning convolutional neural networks. and we didn't actually use a quadcopter. Any questions?
All right, we're open for questions.
Yes.
I assume you have to use some kind of active tensioning on your optical tether, but if it were to break, would you be sunk, so to speak, or could you use your other methods to recover?
Yeah, you always want to be ready to treat the vehicle as an AUV. And so on the AUV dives, all you have is acoustics. And so, we'll get typically 2, sometimes several 64-byte data packets, and the 64-byte data packets at 3.5 kilohertz takes 6 seconds to transmit, and then it propagates at 1.5 kilometers per second. So it's not exactly DSL. And so, so we're always prepared to do a vehicle recovery only via acoustics, and we figured out how to do it. I can walk you through it. It's sometimes a little scary, but once we've got a method that's pretty reliable, and bringing the vehicle up on the port side of the ship in the ice field, we then give a series of commands which commands the vehicle at 50 meters depth, so it's below the propellers that are rotating on the ship, and we maneuver around the bow of the ship step by step. And then we open up an area of ice on the starboard side of the ship near the CCD station where the cranes are, and maneuver the vehicle over. And when the signal from the upward-looking Doppler, we can see that we're in open water, we command the vehicle to surface, and then we take over RF control. Easy. Any other questions? Yes?
How long does that take?
When it works properly, so at these depths, coming up through the water column to the surface is like 45 minutes. And then we'll hang out at 50 meters and go through a sequence of operations. First, you close on the ship, and once we're within about 200 meters of the ship, we can triangulate the vehicle's position using 2 modems that are spaced with about a 40-meter separation on the ship. Once we have a good idea which side of the ship we're on, and confident about that, we bring it around the bow. We don't bring it around the stern because this ship has variable pitch propellers that are spinning all the time at about 100 revolutions per minute, and so it would be bad to be sucked into those. So the surface evolution is between half an hour and an hour when everything works properly. When it doesn't work properly, for example, if you have a dead vehicle recovery, you ballast the vehicle so it's positively buoyant, and if it comes up under the ice, we range offer it to figure out where it is. We had to do some dead vehicle recoveries on this cruise, and what we did is we put a team on the ice in survival suits, immersion suits, localized the vehicle. We knew roughly where it was, found it with the avalanche beacon, drilled a hole in the ice, got a line on it, tied it to some floats, and then the captain did this masterful maneuvering of the ship, maneuvering an 18,000-ton ship like a scalpel to just break the ice away until we got down to the vehicle and then pulled it on board. So that took several hours. Yes?
Out of curiosity, how many vehicles did you lose over the years?
Have I used?
Got lost over the years.
Oh, I mean, how many of my vehicles have we lost? One.
Okay.
Yeah, one. So we lost Nereid in 2014, the one that was at the top of the tree, the 11,000-meter vehicle. So we lost it in spring of 2014. I was not on that cruise, but it was in the Kermadec Trench, which is near Fiji, and there's a deep subduction zone there. And it was doing science on 76th dive, and it was at 10,000 meters. And one of the ceramic pressure housings imploded. We think it was a utility housing. And then the sympathetic shock wave took out all the other ceramic pressure housings on the vehicle, and it also took out, flotation was provided by 2,000 ceramic spheres that are 10 centimeters in diameter, hollow, 1.5 millimeter wall thickness. And so all of that stuff imploded, probably within 100 milliseconds, and it woke everybody up in the ship who was asleep. So we're sad to lose Nereus, but it was a proof of concept vehicle, and we have in mind getting a substantial amount of funding to build a successor to Nereus, and it'll be a better vehicle and more reliable, and hopefully it'll provide routine access to ocean scientists to all of the trenches worldwide. Yes?
So I have a couple of questions. One of them is, when you bring, in these kinds of conditions, when you bring back tethers and especially fiber optic, are there challenges with freezing and being broken? And also, you showed that you can bring the tether down, but when you go that deep, would you have currents that move the...
Yeah, so there are some places that we won't be able to operate with this kind of a tether, like in the Gulf Stream, where you can have 5-knot currents. But in this kind of an area in the ocean where there's no deep western boundary current, nothing that's moving really fast, you're okay. Also, remember that the depressor we can lower down below surface currents. And so if you get a surface current that's driven, say, by a trade wind, that's not going to be in the top 500 to 1,000 meters of the water column, and you can lower the depressor down below that. And so we've done a bunch of hydrodynamic simulations with the tether, and it has a surprisingly large envelope of operation. But I could tell you more details about that.
All right, maybe we should stop here and thank Louis once
Okay.
more.
Thank you, everybody.